reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Hello and welcome to First Post Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alyson Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. China confirms details on the framework of a trade deal with the United States, saying Washington would lift restrictive measures, while Beijing would review and approve items under export controls. South Korea arrests 6 U.S. nationals for trying to send thousands of bottles filled with rice and Bibles into North Korea. The arrest took place near South Korea's Gangwon Island, a designated danger zone close to the north. Sri Lanka's top court blocks a government move to acquire land in Tamil majority north. The ruling follows a UN call to return private land still occupied by troops years after decades-long separatist war. Germany charges a Syrian juvenile with supporting the Islamic State for allegedly helping plan a foiled attack on a Taylor Swift concert in Vienna last year. Norwegian police say the 28-year-old son of the Crown Princess is suspected of 23 offences, including 3 rapes, after a 10-month probe triggered by his arrest for allegedly assaulting his girlfriend. The case has been handed to prosecutors. Hello and welcome. Our top focus remains on Kenya, a nation gripped by unrest over the past few days. It is no longer just a protest story. It's a national crisis. Young Kenyans protesting to mark the anniversary of last year's deadly unrest and the recent custody death of an activist have now been labelled terrorists by the government. Now, Kenya's Interior Minister, Kipchumba Murkomen, has accused protesters of terrorism and attempting to overthrow the government during a day of deadly demonstrations. He defended the police response, saying it was to prevent a regime change as people sought to approach Parliament and the President's residence.
It was terrorism disguised as dissent. There was no peaceful demonstration. It was riots, chaos, and anarchy. Let me therefore state unequivocally that we condemn the criminal anarchists who, in the name of peaceful demonstrations, unleashed a wave of violence, looting, sexual assault, and destruction upon our people. This is nothing to do with protests. This is nothing to do with freedom of expression. It was an unconstitutional attempt to change the regime of this republic. And this is therefore, yesterday what the police did to foil was they were able to foil an attempted coup.
Protest leaders, however, say branding of demonstrations as a coup is the government's attempt to shift attention from the real issues. Mass protests erupted across Kenya on Wednesday, marking 1 year since demonstrators stormed the parliament over the proposed tax hikes. That day is the 25th of June 2024. It was the deadliest of last year's unrest. At least 60 people were killed overall. Now, this year's anniversary protests also turned horrific, with several casualties reported. The government says at least 10 people were killed. But rights groups Amnesty Kenya puts the total at 16. Most of them allegedly shot dead by police. At least 400 others have been injured and 61 arrested. Families mourning those killed are demanding justice.
He has left me with a 2-month-old baby, and the other one is a 2-year-old suffering from cerebral palsy. I don't know what I will do. I just want justice. Justice for the person, because I don't know how I'll start everything. It's not fair.
I just don't know, it's not fair. It's not fair.
Police responded with massive force, firing live rounds, tear gas and water cannons. Some protesters retaliated, throwing stones and charging at the police. Looting and arson broke out in the capital, Nairobi. Thousands of businesses have been damaged. Shopkeepers were seen sifting through debris, some reporting losses worth thousands of dollars.
The losses we estimate might be 100 million. Because of the machinery, there are very many machinery. If you can put the camera there and up, it has very big losses of 100 million Kenyan shilling.
The United Nations, meanwhile, deplored the violence and called for calm and restraint. The latest chaos has been sparked by 2 flashpoints: the anniversary of the anti-tax protest last year and the death of 31-year-old blogger Albert Ojwang, who died in police custody. He was arrested for criticizing the deputy police chief online. Prosecutors have charged 6 people, including 3 police officers, with murder. All 6 have pleaded not guilty. Anger against President William Ruto is rising across Kenya. Though he rolled back the controversial tax hikes last year, public outrage now centers on the escalating government crackdown. Rights groups report that at least 80 government critics have gone missing since last year's demonstrations. Police have often been accused of using extrajudicial force to suppress dissent. President Ruto has firmly sided with the police, assuring them with his unwavering support. This is the final test for Ruto, who came to power in 2022, promising rapid economic progress, but now faces deep resentment and calls to step down. Now, for more on this, we have with us Narima Wako, the Executive Director of Siasa Place, joining us live from Nairobi. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Narima, how credible are the Interior Minister's claims that the protests were aimed at regime change? And what legal or constitutional grounds, if any, support this interpretation?
First of all, he is wrong in terms of saying that it is terrorists that were gathering on the streets on Wednesday. It was a lot of young people and people coming forth in terms of remembrance of last year and the demands that were made that were looking at accountability and pushing for a government that listens to its citizens. And 1 year on, we've seen nothing. And you've mentioned the death of Alfred Ojwang, someone who died in police cells. He was brutally murdered for putting out a post that talked about corruption. So I'd say he's not factual at all. In fact, I was there on Wednesday. It was a lot of young people who wanted to gather, one, for remembrance of those who were lost last year, pushing for compensation in terms of the families who lost their loved ones. Remember, the cases are still ongoing. We haven't had anything from the government in terms of holding people accountable and who is responsible. And we haven't seen any changes in terms of accountability and impunity in those who are leading our country. So I would say that it is not factual, and people came peacefully without any weapons. But what we were met with was a lot of tear gas, water cannons, and threats. We were not given room to be able to protest and demonstrate peacefully.
Right. And Narima, to what extent do these accusations reflect a broader pattern of government responses to civil unrest in Kenya? And what implications might this have for civil liberties and for democratic space in the country?
Remember that just a week ago, we witnessed, the entire country witnessed on live TV, a police officer shooting a mask vendor, someone who was selling masks, while people came out to protest over Ojwang's death. His name is Karaoke, and he was shot at the back of his head while he was doing business on the street by a police officer. And these are things that we are dealing with. We consistently see government not paying attention to police brutality, people who are not confrontational, people who are not carrying weapons, people who are not threatening. And what we have witnessed is the infiltration of protests, where we have seen people who are being funded by politicians to come in as goons to make sure that they steal from these businesses to paint a bad picture of the demonstrators. We are beginning to see a divide between the police and the citizens themselves, where the citizens no longer trust the protection of the police, and they feel threatened every time they see the presence of the police.
Right. And in your view, could the government's framing of the protests as an attempted regime change distract from the actual socio-economic or political grievances that are being raised by the protesters? And what are the risks of such a narrative taking hold domestically or internationally?
It is a dangerous risk because we're beginning to see government propaganda, government bloggers, making sure that they highlight a specific tribe. Now, for us, this happened in 2007, where there was a division ethnically, where there was a blame toward particular tribes that are bringing animosity within our country. We're beginning to see that framework develop. And government bloggers, state bloggers are starting that language. And that's a concern for me. Because even when you see the young people who come to the streets, a lot of them are pushing for good governance. They are not tribal. They're saying that they're tribeless. And the only thing they want is that the government follows the rule of law, and they want to be governed by good government. And this is dangerous because you're talking about a population that's mostly young. The average age in our country is 19. When you talk about 60% of them and more being unemployed, this is the recipe for civil war and destruction if it's not managed properly. So for government to just outrightly say that this is regime change, this is a coup attempt, I think it's a falsehood. I think it's not looking at the issues that a lot of these young people are bringing for, because remember, even in our education system, we have young people who are not able to continue with higher education because of the new university funding model that makes university learning extremely expensive, and the high tax that we continue to see in our income. We are being taxed way too much, and young people are saying, why am I being taxed so much and I'm not seeing the services available to me? So it's a simplified way of looking at the issues that are actually being brought about by a lot of young people who risk their lives to go on the streets.
Yes. Narima, thank you for being with us on Firstpost Africa.
Thank you.
And moving on to some news from South Africa, where a widening rift is threatening President Cyril Ramaphosa's government. His African National Congress party received a 48-hour ultimatum from its coalition partner, the Democratic Alliance over the removal of a cabinet minister. The feud sparked after President Ramaphosa fired Andrew Whitfield. The Democratic Alliance leader was one of the two deputy ministers of Trade, Industry and Competition. The president's office did not give a reason for his removal. It just said the decision was not part of a wider cabinet reshuffle. His removal has dented the South African coalition government. The DA leader and the country's agriculture minister, John Steenhuisen, called Whitfield's removal a calculated political assault on the second largest party in the governing coalition. He delivered a fiery speech in Parliament yesterday, condemning the president's decision. He added that the deputy minister was removed for travelling abroad without the president's permission. Whitfield had visited the US earlier this year. Steenhuisen said they wrote a letter seeking Ramaphosa's permission, but they did not receive any response. Later, in a follow-up letter, Whitfield even apologized to the president, but that too was ignored, according to Steenhuisen. The DA leader called out the ANC's double standards, adding that Whitfield was fired for diligently doing his job and fighting corruption in his department. Steenhuisen pointed out that the ANC's own ministers, despite facing corruption allegations, hold on to office. Now, he went on to name three ANC leaders, Nobuhle Nkabane, David Mahlobo and Thembe Simelane, who face corruption accusations. Steenhuisen called for the removal of all ANC leaders who are accused of corruption in the next 48 hours. The DA warned of grave consequences if the ANC failed to fire them. Despite the ultimatum, the DA decided to vote in favour of the Division of Revenue Bill. It is one of the key pieces of legislation underpinning the budget. Now, this is not the first time when Ramaphosa's ANC and its coalition partner, the DA, are at odds. This year's budget was also a point of contention between the two. The pro-business DA moved to court challenging the legality of the budget process, and the clashes triggered concerns over the DA's potential exit from the coalition. This fear led to a sharp drop in the South African currency, the rand. However, this time political analysts have not sounded any such alarm bells over the growing rift between the two partners. But uncertainty over South Africa's coalition government looms large as the 48-hour deadline set by the DA closes in. And let's shift our focus to the Central African Republic, where 29 students died after a stampede broke out in a school in the capital of Bangui. The tragedy unfolded as a power transformer exploded at an exam center with 5,300 students. They had gathered to take their high school exam. The blast triggered panic in the school, after which the students and supervisors tried to flee the premises. Some even jumped from the first floor of the building to escape.
The exam room when the electricity started sparking. There was panic. The invigilators fled, so we wanted to escape too. But as there was no exit, we were forced to jump from the second and third floors. I have 2 broken legs and a fractured pelvis. For some, it's even worse. Some of them died.
Residents rushed in to rescue the injured as the chaos unfolded. UN peacekeepers, police and other security personnel were also spotted around the school area, overwhelmed by parents and other locals.
My children are also taking their baccalaureate exams this year. Raising children in these conditions, with poverty, tears, and no resources, is already a real struggle. Civil servants are underpaid. We can't make a decent living. Despite everything, what happened is very serious. Our children worked hard. Some of them repeated a year. They hoped to get their diploma so they could go to university, find a job, and help their parents.
Central African Republic's President Faustin Touadera announced 3 days of national mourning and expressed solidarity with the families of the victims.
Circonstances particulièrement douloureuses.
In these particularly painful circumstances, I would like to express my solidarity and compassion to the parents of the deceased candidates, the teaching staff and the students, and offer them my deepest and most heartfelt condolences, as well as my sincere wishes for a speedy recovery to the injured.
Et à leur présenter mes condoléances les plus émues.
The country's education minister has said that measures will be taken to shed light on the circumstances of this incident, and a date for the students to resume their exams program will be announced. The opposition called out the irresponsibility of the authorities in place. It blamed them for failing to ensure the safety of students. According to reports, the incident has also triggered protests against national energy company Enerca. Now, Central African Republic is one of the poorest countries in the world. Civil wars and coups have battered the nation since its independence from France in 1960. And in the middle of this instability and uncertainty, parents send their children to schools hoping to make their future better. But if the very place meant to shape dreams turns into a nightmare and snatch their children away, where will these helpless citizens go? And for our final story today, we're back in Kenya, where TikTok is making headlines, not for dance challenges, but for misinformation dangers. According to a new survey by the Reuters Institute Digital News Report, TikTok has emerged as Kenya's top source of misleading content. The study highlights social media's growing influence as the country moves towards its 2027 presidential election. The survey was based on responses from 2007 English-speaking Kenyans aged between 18 to 50. It was conducted between February and May of 2025, and it was found 55% of Kenyans see TikTok as a major source of misinformation. 38% of them use TikTok for news, and 73% struggle to distinguish what's fake and what's true. TikTok scores the highest misinformation rating as compared to other social media platforms in Kenya. In a country where 92% access news on smartphones, TikTok is exploding as a news source, particularly among the youth, who make up 75% of the population. Short, fun, visual, TikTok is a perfect fit for Kenya's on-the-go, plugged-in generation. But TikTok in Kenya isn't just about lifestyle and dance. It's also political. Creators showcase food, humor, fashion, and also fierce opinions. And that's where things get tricky. Online influencers have been caught spreading disinformation and sometimes are even hired to do it. A recent report highlighted influential bloggers in Kenya were regularly hired by political players to operate fake accounts, sway public opinion, and fan tensions during elections. Deepfake speeches is another weapon. Edited videos are often designed to mislead voters, turning TikTok to a political battleground. But it's a double-edged sword. While politicians try to use it to shape narratives, youths use it as a stage for resistance. TikTok has become key to Kenya's ongoing anti-government rallies. Gen Z protesters have mobilized through hashtags, live-streamed rallies, and have shared videos of police crackdowns. But Kenya is not alone, where TikTok has come to light. Now, the report comes amid widespread concerns over the social media platform. TikTok is facing scrutiny in a significant number of nations, with at least 20 countries having imposed outright or partial bans on the app due to concerns about data privacy, national security, and the app's potential impact on young people. Some of them include India, Somalia, Senegal, the US, and Canada. So while internet access reaches even remote corners of Kenya and TikTok becomes a part of everyday life, its dark side continues to spark concern. And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again at the same time on Monday. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend and goodbye.